I'm very happy to be in Paris today to discuss with David Loew, CEO of Ipsen. Ipsen is a publicly listed, family-controlled, mid-sized pharmaceutical company. Mid-sized means almost 6,000 employees operating in 40 countries with revenues approaching 4 billion euros. The company is headquartered in Paris, but its products are distributed in about 100 countries all over the world. 3 areas of activity: oncology, neuroscience, and rare diseases. David Loew was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Ipsen in July 2020. He came to Ipsen from Sanofi, where he headed for 4 years Sanofi Pasteur, Sanofi's vaccine units. And prior to that, he had spent 20-some years at Roche in various roles and geographies. David, thank you for welcoming me in Ipsen's new headquarters.
Welcome. It's a real pleasure to see you here.
David, a number of industry observers have said the following about your 6 years at the helm of Ipsen. Over the past 6 years, Ipsen has reshaped itself from a mixed pharma consumer group into a focused, growth-driven specialty biopharma with strong financial momentum and a revitalized pipeline. And they say the story is one of focus, discipline, and excellent execution rather than breakthrough innovation and bold investments. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think you said a lot of things.
Yes,
so,
I did.
Perhaps I can answer a couple of them. And
Okay.
they also put it in the bigger context on the evolution of Ipsen. I think we indeed changed quite a lot. So we reshaped the strategy and we wanted to focus very clearly and position ourselves very clearly on oncology, rare diseases, and neuroscience.
Yep.
And I think that the market has picked up. There was clearly a change of culture to become much better in excellence in execution. And I think the market has picked this up as well, having a better pipeline, having a sharper go-to-market strategy. And I think the market has also recognized this. Now, when it comes to then the R&D, we have evolved over time because first we said, okay, we wanted to be in pharma and really get rid of consumer healthcare because we had subcritical mass. And so the market has understood that this was a strategic refocusing. And I think that was a good thing. And they really applauded that we really refocused. And then at the beginning, we had to do deals where we went across the full spectrum of the pipeline: preclinical, early clinical, late stage, on market. And we kind of had to first walk before we were starting to run and go into more disruptive innovation. And that is perhaps this last sentence that you said, it's not yet breakthrough therapy. I would argue that it's partially correct because in the later stage deals at the beginning, we were relatively careful on what kind of deals we did, but we then started to do more gutsy things. For example, with the licensing in on Iqirvo from Genfit, which is a biotech based in Lille, it was totally below the radar of all the analysts. The analysts even provoked us and said, like, what are you doing? It failed in MASH. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. And we said, no. We think this really works in PBC, which is a rare liver disease. And today, I think the market is enthusiastic, and this is one of the reasons why the stock has gone out so much, is that they recognize we have picked a few very good winners. With Bylvay, it's the same thing. It was a new mechanism of action in rare disease and rare liver disease. And today, we are a leader in rare liver disease. So it took the market a bit of time to understand that we're not like in basic science and not innovative science, but we actually had to create the proof to get us there. And when you look at the preclinical things we have licensed in, there are a lot of IDCs, there are T-cell engager bispecifics, so totally new modalities. But of course, we have to first now bring them through the clinic and actually prove this works. And then last one, probably the most interesting one, is on our neuroscience franchise. We have Dysport, which is a traditional
and I want to come back on this
toxin. And here we have re-engineered a completely new molecule, which is a recombinant molecule, which is a combination of a bond A and a bond B. Doesn't exist. It's a completely new category. It's going to be breakthrough innovation because it's going to potentially wipe out Botox. Let's see. So I think the statement was correct at the beginning. But now I think it's really changing. But the market will discover that.
But what I'm hearing is there's on one side the market needs to catch up, but on the other side I'm also hearing, but to some extent they were right, that we initially went with things that were a little bit less risky, and now we're able to take on more uncertain.
That's exactly correct.
More uncertain projects.
Because you need to have the fundamentals right, and then you can go into more risky things. Yeah.
So my next question was going to be, of course, in order to lead this transformation over 6 years, you need to have a lot of decisions and actions, but maybe there's I don't know, 4 or 5 that have had the most impact. I guess you've already mentioned one, which is the work that you've done on the R&D side and on the in-licensing side. Maybe let's come back on this in a minute. What are some of the other key decisions that you made? You mentioned also selling the consumer health.
Yeah. I mean, at the beginning when I arrived, I wanted to know, what do we have in hands? And you have to take a real deep dive to first look at, is your vision clear? Is your strategy clear? Is your operational implementation really top-notch or not? And the answer was, the vision was okay, but not crystal clear. And we really wanted to sharpen that and really sharpen the strategy. So we rolled out the 4 pillars on our strategy, that we wanted to really maximize what we had in hand, but also then license in new drugs and launch them in an excellent fashion. We had to introduce a cost discipline because we had a bit of an open bar when I arrived. I would say it was a loose coalition of affiliates working together, but there was no global brand management, no core asset team strategy on which are the indications we want to go for. On the licensing in strategy, we try to compete with the really big companies. And of course, we don't have the amount of cash that they had. So sharpening this as well. And then on the culture, we wanted to have a culture of real collaboration, agility, being scientific, being purpose-led, and we had a really conscious transformation there, and we can talk more about this. And then, of course, the quality of the people. So in terms of the leadership team, it has evolved quite a bit, because when you redo a vision and a strategy, you need to actually think very carefully, do I have the people on the bus that I actually need for this transformation? And if the answer is no, you then have to see how quickly can you adapt the team and what kind of characters do you want to bring on the bus.
Let me come back on some of these as we go. So consumer health was actually the start of the company almost 100 years ago. Can't have been easy to make that decision. Now, you got some money for it, but as I was rereading about this, I was wondering, was the main reason to divest the consumer health a financial one, meaning this way we have resources to reinvest in more strategically appealing areas? Or was it more, I need to focus the attention of management?
Yeah.
Was it more financial or was it more managerial in a way?
So there was a first part of your question, which was on more like the difficulty and the emotions involved in it. And I think, when you are a company which is still family dominated, so the family shareholders have 51% of the shareholding, and coming, from a grandfather and a father, this was, of course, a discussion which was not an easy discussion. Right. And so being close to the main shareholders, understanding where they come from, what is important for them, for me as a CEO was extremely important to go through. But understanding then what is Ipsen today and what should be the Ipsen of tomorrow, having this conversation and bringing the shareholders with you was an extremely important step to be done. We got there, and to your second question, and this was the trigger for selling it, it was not the money. It was the strategy on where do we want to take Ipsen towards. And, you get a certain amount of money. Now, it was not huge because it was also a bit of a subscale business. It was selling 200 million on a company. We were 2.5 billion, so it was less than 10%. So it was not a financial decision. Okay. It was really strategic alignment and focus.
Understood. And I think that one of the things that we realize more and more is the importance of focus for top management teams, right? Being otherwise there's this dispersion of energy. Now, on the R&D side, you already said, I think we reduced the number of internal developments and we increased acquisitions and licensing in. Why?
Actually, what happened is this reduction of internal basic research was done by my predecessor.
Okay.
So it's the current chairman, Marc de Garidel. He has decided that, okay, on basic research, we are not top-notch and we are not competitive. And as a mid-sized company, we're better off on a licensing in model. He was the CEO at the time, and then he worked as a chairman, and there was a new CEO coming in at the time, my predecessor. What happened was, I would say, is that there was not enough clarity on where to licensing and how to position us and where to go and hunt. Like in which forests do you go and hunt, right? If you hunt in the same forests as the very big ones, you're always going to have the short stick because you don't have the same firepower to do deals. And that was a very important repositioning. So we have done that. And then I started to realize we didn't have the team size which we needed to have to actually do enough deals. Now, we doubled the external and innovation team and the business development team. We separated them so that we don't have a conflict of interest. Like what I want to license in, I love my baby. And then, by the way, I want to pay a big price for it. You want to separate the negotiation of the terms with the science. And we have done that. And that has really worked. So doubling the size, having better people in these teams and being hard-nosed on the discussions on what do we want to license in has really delivered. Now we did over 35 deals in the last 5 years, if you look at it, and many of them panned out very good. Some of them did not work fully, but most of them really, really worked. Now, in average, you have to do more good bets than others. That's, of course, really, really important. And I think we are getting there. So that gives me a lot of confidence for the future. And you also need to diversify, because if you diversify, you stand on 3 solid legs. When you look at our evolution, we were, when I arrived, almost exclusively an oncology company and exclusively one product company. And now we have so many launches. We have 3 unblindings coming up this summer. We're starting 3 more late-stage trials this year, So it's super exciting to have maneuvered through this potential storm in a very good fashion. And you see what has happened now.
Now, another one of your growth engines over the last few years has been Dysport that you just mentioned. And of course, that was one of the 4 legs of your strategy to develop existing products and molecules. How did you identify that this was a sort of diamond in the rough?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. This is where I think as a CEO, you occasionally need to do real deep dives. And you need to go out and talk to customers, talk to patients yourself. Because as a CEO, there is always the danger that you get it 3 times filtered or 10 times filtered. And there is an effect of lost in translation that can happen. And when you come new to an organization, you want to take that deep dive. Okay. And that's what I did. I went to Garches, close to Paris. And I said to the teams, look, I want to go and actually see an injection clinic on a neurotoxin and what is spasticity and cervical dystonia, etc. And they said, okay, we can organize this. So I went to this professor and we started to, after the injections, and I saw what was happening, we started just to have a chat. And I started to ask a lot of questions. What is happening to the patients? How do they get diagnosed? How do they get transferred, referred to you? How do you decide on the dosing? How often they come back, etc., etc. All these questions to understand what happens to patients in the system. Suddenly, I started to understand that only about 10% of patients who should be treated actually get treated, which is actually the biggest failure in medicine I have seen in the healthcare system. And then I started to realize this is not just in France, this is actually global. And so we started to say, hey, there is something, we need to really change that, because patients do not get what they should be getting. After a stroke, you have about a third of people which develop a spasticity. So you have this muscle cramp which stays, and you can't really go to a physiotherapist and get relief because your brain has a damage and sends a signal to your muscle to contract. So you need to interrupt that signal. If you don't interrupt the signal, you will never get rid of it.
Right.
And that has dramatic consequences. So then we worked our way back from there. And with the teams, we started to say, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's understand deeply what is happening here. Because the teams, they were focused on, oh, we need to gain market share versus Botox. And then you go like, yeah, but let's first understand the whole thing.
Right.
And let's see what we have in hand and then see how we can differentiate, for example, versus a Botox. What are the strengths? Have we ever done a head-to-head trial? No, we have not. Now we have done the phase 3 and we're going to present the results next week. So it's very exciting, and people didn't dare. They thought this is the ugly duckling and, we have tried.
Because much smaller than Botox.
Exactly. And so there were attempts in the past to kind of go to market and change something, etc. But there was a lack of discipline on the depth of thinking, very clearly. And so we had to bring in different marketeers, go back to the drawing board, and basically resuscitate the molecule, which we did.
Was there also a lack of belief?
Yes, there was.
Okay.
Because, it was a wicked problem before we really understood it. It was multifaceted,
Right.
and wicked problems are wicked because there is not a simple solution. So you needed to understand really which are the screws we need to tighten to see movement. And only when you tighten all the screws, suddenly it works, right?
Now, you mentioned Botox. I wanted to ask you about this because Botox, of course, is a larger amount of revenues for a larger company, which in principle suggests not a good idea to go head-to-head. But it must be tempting. How do you discipline yourself and the organization to say, no, not head-to-head, but let's try to find differentiation and so on?
Well, for me, I would say going head-to-head with big ones is per se not a problem. I give you just a couple of examples. On Cabometyx, which is a renal cell cancer drug, we're against Pfizer and MSD. We're clearly number one. On Somatuline, we were against Novartis. We're clearly number one. You take Decapeptyl, prostate cancer, we're clearly number one versus AstraZeneca and Takeda. So yes, we can take up the big ones, but you need to be very smart. You need to really look, what do you have in hand? Do you have a winner? How do you differentiate? To your point on Dysport then, we said, look, we hear a lot of feedback from the market. It might actually be acting longer, and you will see results being released of this head-to-head, which we then did, to actually create the evidence that what we think we hear is actually scientific truth. You need to know what are the things you have in hand to actually take up the big ones. Do you have a good chance? Yes or no? We have a follow-up compound, the long-acting, and I'm pretty sure Abby is not going to like this because, we have something which is truly different. So more to come.
Actually, I'm about to ask you what's next. But before, one last question. You mentioned the culture and the need to move the culture to something that was more agile and more collaborative. What were some of the key actions that enabled you to make progress on this front?
First, I think you need to actually do a diagnosis. What is the culture that you have? And it comes through conversations with people, but you can also use instruments, right? There are some agencies which can help you to actually describe what is the current culture. And then we had a global leadership team meeting where we assembled the 150 top leaders of Ipsen. And we went through, okay, what are the findings and what is actually the culture we want to have?
Right.
And so there was a work with them. What is the culture we want to have? First point. And then second, how do you actually consciously influence it? So what are the moments of truth? People will watch you as a leader to say, what he says is actually congruent with what he does or she does. The culture is also some unspoken rules, right? So the unspoken rules come from how do you behave in a meeting? How do you behave in a key moment? What do you reward? What do you talk about? So you can consciously shift the culture over time in terms of being conscious what you value and what you do not value and what you do not want to see, right? And then you can put, let's say, a bit oil in the machine. So for example, having a more networked organization was something very important for us. We were very siloed between the functions. And having people wanting to work together, having fun working together is very important. And so we had several initiatives on how to bring them together. So we did the leadership course with IMD, of course, as you know. And once you put people into the mixer, you talk about certain things in these leadership courses, but what happens is that they spend time together.
Right.
And then, for example, at our annual global leadership team, which we do every year, we bring the 150 together. We also organized a big party. We had karaoke. Everybody had to dress up in costumes and had to do their own lyrics and etc. In the beginning, there was a bit of skepticism. It's like, oh, karaoke, really? You cannot imagine how explosive this became. Mm-hmm. I mean, people had to work across the functions together to have organized something fun. It became one of the most fun evenings we ever had. It was releasing an energy which was unbelievable, and it gave the taste to people to wanting to work together and to like each other. And I think for me, that is part of the recipe of changing a culture, is bringing people together, having them want to work together.
You mentioned also moments of truth where people look at you, particularly as a CEO. What would be one or two of the things that you were quite conscious of at an individual level?
I would say it's a mix of what you say, of course, in town halls, but then it's more like, okay, this is kind of the official line, right? But then when you go into small meetings, what are you then talking about? How do you behave in key moments like business reviews, portfolio discussions on when we do trade-offs? Do we see the patient really as kind of our driver or not?
Okay.
What kind of positions do we take towards governments? What values do we stand up for? And they will feel you. They will feel if you're authentic. And if you're authentic, they will trust you and they will want to do something with you. If they don't trust you and they think you say something, but you mean something else and you do something else, people will immediately pick it up. You cannot hide. As a CEO, but also as an executive leadership team member, you cannot hide. People will watch you all the time and they will see if it's congruent or not. So you have to be very, very congruent.
Does it help that Ipsen is a mid-sized company with a bit over 5,000 people, which is obviously a lot of people, but is also not 50,000 or 100,000? Does it go a little bit quicker?
Yeah, I think as a mid-sized company, you can go faster, which is, of course, one of our value proposition when we want to attract top talent or high potentials, which is we are nimble, agile, very fast, very short decision making. You're not so far away from the senior leadership team. At the same time, we have the global presence, we have the pipeline, we have the firepower to do deals, we have the money to invest for launches, we can take up the big ones, So it's a really nice mix. And we get 90,000 applications per year of people who want to join Ipsen.
Wow.
I mean, on a workforce of like 6,000 people. So it's amazing now to see that people want to come to Ipsen. They see the energy, they see the speed, they see the delivery. And so, success breeds success. So you can attract stronger people and you really can get the people that you want to have.
And what I'm hearing also in what you just said is the same strategic perspective of let's be differentiated and then let's highlight our differentiation, as opposed to
exactly.
Now
be really clear on this. Be really clear on the positioning. What are you?
Now, the strategy Focus Together on Patients and Society was launched end of 2020. It's still on your website today. How do you sustain the great results that you guys have had? What comes next?
I think the Focus Together for Patients and Society is not going to change because it's 4, I would say, magic words which we debated for a long time. Because once you have this as kind of a tagline, this is what we stand for. It gives a message to the external world, but also to the internal world. So on the focus, you said it before, it becomes more and more important in a world of, social media, distraction, Iran war, Ukraine war, etc., where people can get unfocused and nervous. And they can, have an emotional state of feeling a bit stressed. You need to really bring it back to what do you stand for. So the focusing on what we do and the focusing on what creates impact is going to become even more important for the future. So we're going to roll out now a next level cultural evolution, which is called Make It Count. And on the Make It Count, it's about how can you grow? And, our ambition is to potentially double or triple in the next 10 years, which is a juicy ambition.
And that's official?
Yeah, we didn't give the guidance to the market, let's say, but that's an internal ambition, right? So this is something where if you want to achieve that, you cannot grow the headcount completely in line with your sales. You need to make sure that you grow and you pace yourself in the growth. And this means you don't want to burn out people and just have them work longer hours, but you want to really focus on what makes the biggest impact. So it's the old Pareto, 20% of the effort gives you 80% of the results, which the older I'm getting, the more I think this is so
There was wisdom there.
There was so much wisdom in this. Yeah. And to then really focus on people to what makes the biggest impact and be clear about it and really measure it, right? The together, it becomes more and more important even for the future. So next level culture is on the Make It Count and really focusing on the impact even more in that world of noise. And then, of course, on where we are positioning and in terms of focusing, oncology, hematology, rare, and neuroscience is going to stay here. But now we can grow it. And you have seen that we were
within these three areas.
In these three areas. But what we have a declared target of becoming more balanced on the three areas. Right. And when you look at the evolution of our cells, this is exactly what happened. We have come out of nothing on rare disease, and we have now a real leadership in rare diseases. On neuroscience, we have a sustainably longer acting recombinant neuroinhibitor, which really can change that field. And then we can tag on other things on neuroscience. So it's the right path. Now make it bigger.
The company is doing much better than when you took the helm. How do you prevent the development of, some complacency, and how do you keep everyone hungry?
Well, that's a good question, because when you're successful, the biggest threat is that you're successful, right? So people could become complacent. I think I would say, there is a portion of discipline that you need to instill of setting a high bar and also painting a vision of a very big, hairy goal. We talked about, could we double or triple the company size? Show the light and then have people rally behind it so that they don't think like, now we did it, we're good. No, it's going to be, okay, this is our next horizon. Can we get there? It needs to be a question. Can we get there? If you don't have that question, the complacency comes in. If you set a big, hairy goal, people will start to think, okay, perhaps we can, not sure. And so there is this mindful risk-taking. There is the appetite of wanting to get there, the energy, the passion. And of course, you need to explain the why, that if we have fantastic drugs, we can serve more patients, and there are still so many unmet medical needs. Even our employees know about them because they have people in their, family which are sick, or their children, or, friends of them, and etc. So if they see the connection on our purpose and what we can do as a company, that lights the fire, honestly. I mean, it's amazing the energy that we see. We just got the engagement survey back. We went up every single year, and we are now way above average in the pharma industry. Same thing for the Glassdoor score. We are way above pharmaceutical industry. So this is actually very rewarding. People see what we're doing and they love what we do.
Now, one of the things that you did is you made quite a few changes in your team, in the top team. And it's now a relatively large top team. It's you and 13 people, I believe. What are the pros and cons of having such a large team?
For me, having, 13 direct reports is not an issue in that sense that, it fosters actually short, distance to the CEO and to the executive leadership team members. Flat hierarchies is something which can help accelerate the organization. Now, it means you need to have really good people, because you cannot be there and coach and handle them all the time. That doesn't work. So you need to have really, really proficient people. And I think now the executive leadership team is I think, one of the strongest teams I've ever had in my career. So it's a real pleasure to work with them. And then, of course, comes the factor, not just working me with them, but it's also them amongst them. And so you have to invest into growing together as a very, very strong team, having debates, having tensions, talking about tensions, talking about where we want to go, having clarity on the values, on the culture we want to have. And you need to spend time on doing this. So on our executive leadership teams, we take time off where we go to a place which is not in the office. We don't talk only about the business. We have always like 1 or 1.5 days where we talk about us, the team, where we talk about the company, the culture, the values, the leadership skills, and you need to spend time on it.
How often do you do these offsites?
So we have face-to-face about 6 times a year, and then we have intermittently also video conferencing with the executive leadership team. So we meet once a month, let's say. And so 6 times face-to-face, roughly. And in those 6 times face-to-face, we have about 3 times where we spend time on the team. So we use instruments like, for example, Hogan, or we take facilitating agencies to look at leadership principles and, leadership behaviors and what's happening in the team.
Of course.
You really need
so
to
you
spend
work
time
on
on it.
how do we work together?
Yeah. But also, you need to also spend time on having fun together. I think it's very important because liking each other, as we spoke before, liking each other is a very important piece of having trust. And when there is tension, the trust capital should not be underestimated. I think there's probably in literature not enough on the trust capital, because the trust and I like you capital can be used when the going gets rough.
Right.
And the forgiveness needs to kick in because people can be stressed. They can be stressed at home. They can be stressed by things what happen in the world. And, sometimes then we have this reaction when there is a bit of, ruffling feathers.
Sure.
But the trust capital helps you to never get into the danger zone. So I think it's very important.
Now, you also mentioned the importance of spending time to discuss longer-term sort of issues. That's one of the things that top teams often find difficult, because when you meet, there's always some broken windows to discuss. And so how do you make the time to get away from short-term issues and tactical issues and really focus on longer-term sort of elements?
I think it's by having the discipline on structuring the agendas correctly. You need to give space for the shorter term burning platforms and etc. And once you have done this, it gets it off the chest. And then you can go into the longer term, big strategic discussions. Where do we want to go? How do we get there, etc. And so giving dedicated time for both helps mentally free up the space but there is this important thing, I want to get it off my chest, that you need to get first off the chest. And then once you evacuated that, you can really spend the time on the long term. And then you go somewhere else, you disconnect from the office, you really spend time, having a free mental space. Because if not, it gets convoluted and it gets mushed up and mixed up, and it's not helpful.
So it's not necessarily the same meeting in the same place.
Right.
Okay. Understood. Now, you mentioned already one of the non-negotiables is I need to have really strong people. So there's an issue of I guess, professional competence. What else is a non-negotiable? What else are you looking for in members of your top team?
Well, clearly integrity is a total non-negotiable. Ipsen thinking. I don't want to have territorialism or political behavior. Absolute dead no-go, because this pulls a team down. You want to have, in the end, a leadership team and not a team of leaders where they're all thinking about their function, but they don't think about Ipsen. So we need to have leaders which think about Ipsen. And that's not just true for the executive leadership team. It's true for all employees. So it's Ipsen first, not your budget, not your headcount. It's Ipsen first and the patient first. So this is very, very
But how do you assess that it's going to be Ipsen first?
Well, it's very easy. If you start seeing behaviors which are me first, my career first, my department first, my headcount first.
But that's after you hire.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, so your question is, how do I filter out people which would think like this?
Yeah.
So we do assessment centers and we throw them into simulations where you will start to see behaviors, right? And of course, when you give cases where you write the case in a direction that they might be tempted to go there, but you don't want to see that behavior, you can actually observe it and see if they fall into the trap, or if they think, yes, my mission was this, but now that I'm taking a step back and I'm thinking bigger picture, actually I should do something else. So
you do try to assess this.
Try to assess it. I go and observe in these assessment centers from my hirers. So I spend, we spend about in these assessment centers 1.5 days. It's a big investment. So we do this for executive leadership team members, but also for the global leadership team members. So it's a big effort. But there is one big thing which changes. You can accelerate the characteristics of the people you want to bring on board, because you really filter out the bad hires. And so we had very, very few bad hires. They happen occasionally, you will never escape. But you can really minimize it by using the assessment centers. And when you go as an observer, and I go as a CEO, as an observer for executive leadership team members that I recruited, I see immediately where they're really strong and where they potentially need some support and development areas. And then once we have that after the assessment center, we have done coaching even before some people joined Ipsen on what is it that we want to polish and change a bit, and also have truthful discussions on what are the values and what leadership behaviors do I want to see.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned in a previous conversation we had was this notion of single accountability, where basically what I understood is for every big issue or big initiative that we have, of course, people are expected to collaborate, but there's always one who is, in the end, accountable for the outcome.
Phone call.
The one who gets the phone call. What are the benefits of doing it this way?
So first of all, just to help for people to understand what do we mean by single accountable. So when you have, for example, a very flat hierarchy and you have projects, let's say, where several of the executive leadership team members are involved, or for example, on the global leadership team level, it's the same thing. You have different functions which are being involved. Everybody could be responsible. Yes, they are all responsible, but there is only going to be one person I will phone up if it goes really well, or if I have a question, or if it goes not so well. I need to be able to say, okay, everybody is clear that in the end, Jean-François will get the phone call. And then Jean-François has an accountability to make sure that you tapped into all the people which have to contribute and which are responsible for their function, and that they work together, and that you come with a recommendation on what you want to do based on having listened to everybody. So you're not turning into the dictator which can just decide single-handedly what you're going to do. You have an accountability to tap into the others, listen about all the pros and cons of different scenarios, and then come with a very clear recommendation. This is what we want to do, and here are the reasons why, and here was the debate that we had, but this is what I recommend because of X, Y, Z. So then it becomes really clear. It accelerates decision-making massively. There is not a trap of going to the lowest common denominator, which is what happens in consensus-oriented cultures, that it slows down. It's normally the lowest common denominator, which is usually pretty bad decision because everybody is semi-unhappy. And that doesn't help. You need to make sure that you get the best decisions.
And this is in part because instead of this project being the number 4 priority for all of us, there's one of us for whom it's priority number 1 or number 2.
Actually, it links to the performance review. So the single accountable on a given project is going to have it in their performance review. They know this is one of their top priorities. The responsibles which are contributing, they also get it into the performance reviews, but it's not going to have the same weight as a goal, as a priority, as the single accountable. So on the single accountable, it's going to be number 1. If you're responsible and you have to contribute to something, you will also have it, but it's going to rank lower in the priority of the goals.
I understand the interdependence. There's also a part of me that thinks, but could this create tension between the team members? Because somehow you have a vested interest in pulling the project in the direction of your your main responsibilities.
And this is the trap I talked before on Ipsen thinking or not Ipsen thinking.
Okay.
So if you show a behavior where you don't have Ipsen thinking and you can detach yourself from your function and from your, let's say, turf, you're not the leader that we need to have.
Okay.
You need to be able to wear the Ipsen hat and become agnostic from your function. If not, you shouldn't be at Ipsen.
Understood. Now, Ipsen's stock price has been doing very well over the last 6 years, especially the first year and especially over the last 18 months. In the middle, there was a period of 3 years where it was a bit up and down and sort of flattish. Were you ever frustrated that the market didn't seem to recognize the progress that was being made?
I wouldn't say frustrated, but perhaps a bit impatient, right? By character, you know me since a while. I'm a bit impatient. So, of course, at the beginning, you're in the honeymoon period where the investors think, okay, new CEO, new strategy, it's clear, okay, great, okay, we adhere to this. Now let's see if this actually delivers, right? So you will go through a phase where it's the show me. And you have to just, as the captain of the ship, you have to be patient that the show me is going to come, because in pharma, we're not in a business where you turn some wheels and you immediately take off. You can squeeze more out of what you have. Yes. So we did that. That gave us the growth that we have. We had, in the last 5 years, we had a 9% growth each year, right?
You said, maybe on occasion I get a bit impatient. How do you manage this impatience?
Well, I think it's a certain discipline in the lifestyle that you have and a mental stage. So it's both, right?
Okay.
So I would say on the lifestyle, I think you have to be patient with yourself and you have to get the adrenaline down. And getting the adrenaline down means you need to have time slots where you have a meeting with yourself, meaning that you take time off for vacation so that your brain can relax. You spend time with your friends, with your family. Family for me is super important. So we spend quite a lot of time together in the family, and you can really recharge your batteries so that when the going gets tough, you do have the emotional energy to weather some storms or not become too impatient or not to become too impulsive, right? So you need to dial it down, the adrenaline. That's very, very important. And then I think you have to have a mental stage that you have to say, look, what has happened before me, I cannot change. I can happen what happens in front of me, and I'm going to try to my best effort to influence that. And when you say, I will try my best effort and I believe I'm doing my best effort, that gives you the mental peace to then in the evening go to sleep and say, okay, tomorrow is another day. Yes, there might be a storm and, many things happening and it's difficult, etc. But you're telling yourself you're good. Yes, there's still a lot to be done. Yes, we could do much better on many things. But you have a mental stage where you have a certain calm, and that also gives you the gravitas, and people will sense it. People will sense if you're nervous or if you are kind of calm and you have the inner peace to say, we're good. I saw on LinkedIn a post which I found really funny, but so true. Should you worry? There are many people who worry all the time.
Right.
And actually, there's almost like a decision tree. The decision tree was, do you have a problem? No, then don't worry. Do you have a problem? Yes. Can you do something about it? Yes, then don't worry, because you can do something about it. If you cannot do something about it, you shouldn't worry, actually, because there's anyway no anything you can do about it. Yes, you can risk mitigate and etc., but you can't change the dynamic, right? So you shouldn't worry about this piece. You should think about, not worry about, think about what you can do to that.
Now, you are celebrated in the press as someone who's instilled within Ipsen a very healthy and helpful dose of focus and execution excellence. And I guess this requires you to be quite focused and quite disciplined, including in terms of your own agenda. Is that fair?
That's a very fair statement, because I think if you're not clear as a CEO, people are confused. The 6,000 people which work with you, they will not know where this whole thing is going. So you need to really spend time on creating a space for yourself to think very hard on where do you want to take the company towards. That comes with structuring your agenda accordingly. And, thinking about your priorities. And so I carve out, let's say, the first 50 minutes of my day always to take a step back and say, am I on the right things? It's so easy in these days to get, diverted by an email, an urgency here, something geopolitical happening there. And you always need to take a step back and think, does this really impact me? Yes, no, or the company? And then think, okay, am I on the right priorities? And you need to make subtle shifts to make sure that you're always on the high impact things and not get diverted. It's very easy to get diverted.
Does this come naturally to you? Is this something that you enjoy, or is this something that you have to work on?
I think I'm blessed in a way. It comes naturally to me. I was always kind of practicing this 2080, even at high school.
Okay.
I was doing the right amount of effort to pass. I was not a A student in a way, so I did the right amount to make sure that I always have a bit of a reserve to pass.
Okay.
But I never wanted to have like the best marks everywhere, because I had many other things in my life that I love to do, playing music or, meeting people and celebrating friendships.
So you've always been conscious of return on time invested.
Yes, very much so, yeah.
Interesting.
I studied also, business administration and economics, and of course Pareto is a big thing in business schools. And so in a way it came naturally to me, I have to say, yeah.
Now, you've been CEO of Ipsen for 6 years. You've led a very successful transformation that has been noticed and praised. Is there a moment where you'll tell yourself, I've done most of what I'm going to do here, and should I be doing something else? Or not?
Not at all. Actually, I'm having a total ball because I see the people that we have now at Ipsen. They're so passionate.
Okay.
It's almost like mutually lighting the fire. So once a fire starts and there's a chemical reaction, that it starts to accelerate. If it becomes bigger, it accelerates even more. That's a bit how I feel about Ipsen right now. It's what we have put in place is an amazing, passionate workforce. We see it in the engagement survey, as I said before, and the Glassdoor, etc. And so it's kind of getting into a positive spiral that you have what is needed to do even more and to have even more impact, which I find very inspiring for myself and which I enjoy, and therefore I'm getting out of bed and I love what I do.
Last question. My question was going to be, how do you sustain your own energy and drive? I guess it's in part this virtuous spiral that you just described. How do you sustain your curiosity? Part of what you've done is you've taught the organization to think differently. And how do you yourself make sure that you also remain curious and connected to some of the things that might lead or that might require different responses?
I think the curiosity was never my problem. I was
always curious.
Okay. Curious person. I don't know if this is in your DNA or not. I love to learn.
Okay.
And in the pharmaceutical industry, it's just a pleasure because you learn about so many diseases, other trends come in like AI, different ways of working. You have different generation thinking differently. So I find it just a pleasure to learn because there's so much more that we can discover. And I would say by nature, a very curious person. It's not an effort that I need to do. It's just, it comes natural in a way.
So a few years from now, we'll have another catch up to discuss how you guys doubled or tripled.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, it would be definitely a pleasure to do that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, David, and all the best.
Thank you, Jean-François.
Thank you.
Thank you.